There's the phrase, so-and-so is a fraud. Or maybe some of us try to ascertain, do they know what they're talking about? We might otherwise put it, are they full of it or not? Or we might say, are they reliable? Or finally, maybe the phrase comes to thought, are they for real? The other day also, I ran into an article popping up on my phone from the Atlantic magazine, or rather the Atlantic. August 13th, 2022, a staff writer wrote an article entitled, "That's It, You're Dead to Me. Suddenly Everyone is Toxic" by Caitlin Tiffany. Very interesting concept. I have a book, in fact, I haven't read it, about toxic coworkers. And you hear from time to time, so-and-so is toxic, or the overall conception of the so-called narcissist or sociopath. I don't like those words, and I think they're very poorly defined in general, but the idea from the, quote, leading experts on such is that if you identify these traits, and here are the traits, run for the hills. They're toxic. And no amount of love can fix these people or make a relationship work. So run for the hills. If you have a relationship with them, figure out how to dump them and cut your losses and collect plenty of evidence against them in terms of a possible lawsuit, etc., etc. But I have to wonder about that. And from the School of Life in England, Elaine de Botton, who heads it up, has put out a couple very short videos on YouTube that kind of contradict this. Like one title being What Love Really Is and Why It Matters, a year ago, and 3 years ago, What True Love Really Is. What True Love Really Is. And he talks basically of love as entailing toleration of people's flaws in great part. And he also says in another video, it might be entitled along the lines of Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person. He says, we're all crazy, and that if you're dating someone or talking with someone, you should be discussing and asking, what kind of crazy are you? I'm crazy in this way. In fact, there's some debate, and found on YouTube videos and such, is everybody mentally ill, or only, as per governmental officials, saying 20%, and what does that even mean anyway? For others, like the famed writer Robert Greene, talks in various writings of his, including the 48 Laws of Power, that what we need to be doing is focusing on what people's character is, whatever that might mean. Vague term, perhaps. But to want to bifurcate people into two groups, like the safe versus the unsafe, friend versus foe, quote, mentally ill versus, quote, not mentally ill, or whether they're in our religious sphere as per our views, or not. These kind of questions, including also, quote, are they a narcissist or are they a sociopath or not, without these terms even being defined very well at all, by the way, by almost anyone, strikes me as wanting to put people in two camps, the perfect and the broken, or rather the toxic versus the non-toxic. But I think life would show us that we all have flaws, only maybe different types of flaws. In fact, U.S. Psychiatry Today talks of this thing called schizophrenia, as they put it, as being the presence of delusions, or maybe disorganized thinking alternatively. And interestingly, though, if a delusion is, as I've seen, the best of people addressing this topic simply a lie you tell yourselves, or that lie being in essence a denial, then I'm not surprised I saw several years ago on the internet that everybody's insane in society, basically. And if you would consider, I think all of us, with very, very, very few exceptions, the Buddhists might call these enlightened people, whatever that means. Almost everybody has at least one denial, and thus one delusion. And thus everybody's a schizophrenic if you go by the strict definition from U.S. Psychiatry Today. And thus, of course, we're all crazy. We're all insane. But then, are we just to kick out the whole human race and say we're all toxic? Now, we all hear, too, the phrase, a dog is a man's best friend, or a woman's best friend, or maybe it's a cat, or alternatively, a plant. We love plants, too, don't we? Or maybe nature. Seems to me all of these have in common one strong factor, and that's that these, quote, items tend to be much more predictable, and they don't talk back to us. They don't tell us things we don't want to hear about ourselves. And finally, if you don't like that particular animal or whatever, you can, quote, purge it from your life by taking it to the shelter, or you can take the plant and put it on the curb, or whatever. Now, as per people, I think we like to think that we would want in people what we can get from a commodity item these days, especially, like a watch, sometimes a car, a photograph you purchase. We want ultra reliability, or else take it back for a money-back guarantee, offered more and more today. We want predictability from items, and for them, of course, never to have anything of a hiccup to us. Now, in certain areas, perhaps there was once, maybe still, lemon laws. If you bought a car and you had to take it back to a repairman in such a period of time over 3 times, you could declare by law the car to be a lemon and get your money back. Or we might just say, this item is broken, and then you throw it out on the curb. Or if you've purchased something and it's still in warranty, you might want to take it back to the store or send it back to the outlet by mail, and you say, oh, this is defective. Or in people terms, this person is toxic, this person is, quote, mentally ill, this person is a, quote, danger to society, this person is friend or foe. Now, where did we develop such high standards for people, such that if they have flaws of significance, almost all of us do, we not only don't want to tolerate them, but have found ways of living without them, without people in general, thus? How can this have happened? Well, several things come to my mind anyway, that people are no longer an essential in our lives for survival or even emotional happiness of a sort. Why would that be? I think, for instance, a biggie is because since 1951, we've had a number of drugs that we can call medicines, and not really drugs. Thorazine being the first one. This was called at the time a major tranquilizer, and later relabeled a variety of terms to include antipsychotic. But really, the drug being, some would call a lobotomy drug, equivalent to what was available prior to it, the ice pick lobotomy or surgical lobotomy with a knife. And prior to that, and to the present day, maybe the administration of electroconvulsive shock therapy, ECT, sometimes to levels so high that the brain is permanently impaired, shall we say. So if you were to term drugs since 1951 on the order of Thorazine, and more fewer side effects on the downside as time went on, with what they call second generation drugs of this sort, isn't it interesting then the impact this has probably had in our society? I'd say I'm fairly sure of it, in fact. For this is the first time in the history of mankind that we could numb our brains almost as if a surgical knife had been applied prior to 1951, and at the same time call it medicine, because in large cases it could be reversed by the slow cutting and elimination of such drugs that are taken. Whereas before, if you were to take alcohol and call it medicine, or heroin and call it medicine, there would be much uproar. And then, in my opinion, there was not just the creation of Thorazine, a major tranquilizer, but many minor tranquilizers that would go by names of Klonopin, Xanax, and so on, and multiply ad infinitum. And then, toss in too the antidepressants, which in my mind probably have a very numbing effect too. Just talk to anyone who is taking one and ask about their sex life and sex drive, and then you throw in the so-called bipolar drugs, which the original drug being lithium, founding by Cade to basically numb a guinea pig so that it was motionless. And of course then lithium being the gold standard for bipolar, as they call it, and bipolar being such a large spectrum of topics involved, how interesting then that you could call this a numb-out drug also. But as used more and more, and then with drugs administered for topics such as ADHD, it's called, autism, opposition defiance disorder, OCD, as it's called. These diagnoses now proliferating to over 500 in number. I think originally called just simply anxiety. How interesting then that we would take all these what I call numbing drugs and term them medicine and see their use skyrocketing. So if we can numb ourselves so easily and call it medicine, and medicine as applied to a genetic problem in our brains, or what you might call thus a handicap, as if coming back from a war, missing your limbs, then this seems problematic to me. So the more we can numb ourselves out, 1/3 of American women now, at least, taking antidepressants alone. How interesting, thus, that people would not fulfill the same role that they did in our lives prior, I would say, to 1951, and onward more and more. Why would you need people if you can essentially sleep 24/7, 365, with the aid either of conventional sleep or a zombie almost inducing drug? Next, there's the topic, of course, of, quote, welfare. I note that a major box store carries a new book up by Newt Gingrich on various issues in our society today. And how interesting, thus, that however you slice and dice it, we have to do less and less all the time to survive and still get our basic needs met, as per food, some sort of shelter to live in, medical care of some sort, a variety of things of this sort, transportation too. Whereas before, there was the so-called poorhouse. And in earlier days yet, the idea that if you didn't work and you didn't have a spouse or you didn't save money for old age, you would simply die. Now that's considered prehistoric, an idea. And then so many things concerning ways that used to be such a struggle in our lives, whether it was butchering a cow or raising crops, it's done so much more efficiently and streamlined, refined in general. And we simply have very streamlined solutions for basic issues that weren't basic a couple hundred years ago, or even 100 years ago. And of course that includes cars, washing machines, air conditioning, heating systems, and much, much more. Next, I'd say that we've gotten more and more used to instant solutions. We would like people to be instant solutions for us also, and if not, they go on the curb, so to speak, in part by way of easy divorces compared to, 50, 30 years ago and prior. Not that I think marriage is a good solution for many, or that a toxic, or see right there I used the word toxic, but a very, very difficult marriage should not be exited from. But at any rate, how interesting in general that if people don't perform like a watch, or something we could say is defective and get our money back, that we have less and less interest in them and less need. Again, by way of zone out drugs, by way of getting our needs met without people, i.e. welfare and checks coming automatically by the month, and all the more for what they call mental disabilities, not just a physical one. And I don't know if this is last but not least, but these days one needn't move from one's castle, so to speak, whether a house or apartment, whatever, and have everything delivered to your door, even Meals on Wheels, packages, and essentially conduct your business online from your castle also. So what need really for people? I suppose in a very short order we will be ordering children online by sending in whatever or nothing, picking out the eye color, height, according to how much money you have to pony up for certain features. Then, if you want a child, a mate will be utterly superfluous, and I suppose that's coming down the line before too long. Just like hydroponic raising of vegetables without soil. So, these are my thoughts then concerning calling somebody a fraud if they don't measure up to the standards of what we would want in a pet, a plant, a watch, a commodity item that is, quote, returnable or dispensable by putting on the curb. I'll close with one last note from history. We all have heard high praise for Lincoln, Abe Lincoln, the president in the 1860s. Now, some would say he had considerable flaws in this and that department, but how interesting if you were to look that he suffered at times considerably from what they call depression today, or some would simply say being bummed out, for a number of reasons perhaps, but at any rate, it was well known that he struggled with this nowadays, and he would never make it to the presidency these days, but back then it was not an issue because flaws were not considered major problems, and they were acknowledged to be had by all. But nowadays, that is not the case. If we had flaws and have flaws in politicians, they're airbrushed away. And until they are installed in office and we discover this or that, and we start to complain and claim that they're frauds and defective and so on, and want a refund. How interesting how things have shifted. Back in the 1860s with Lincoln, we felt inconveniences, flaws, much more acceptable. Now, with the ability basically to do without people and still live our lives muddling along, even if numbed out, so to speak. How interesting the shift. I'll close with finality by citing titles of 2 books that are of interest. Comfortably Numb and This Is Your Country, High on Drugs. A third one I might add that I have not yet read is Drugging the Poor. And if you were then to go a step further and say that maybe we need to reevaluate whether we should call these drugs or medicine or what, I think that has a lot to say for shift in society.